For years, people hurried past the homeless man outside the Daily Grind coffee shop, barely glancing at him as he told stories about playing basketball with Michael Jordan. Most thought he was just another street person making up tales for attention or spare change. Even when he described Jordan's secret practice habits or the way he'd palm the ball like it was an orange, nobody stopped to really listen. Nobody except 12-year-old Sarah Chen. She didn't know why she believed him when everyone else walked away. Maybe it was the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the game. Maybe it was how he knew things that weren't in any book or documentary. Or maybe it was just that Sarah had always been good at seeing the truth in people, but she never imagined that her curiosity would uncover a 40-year-old mystery, one that would bring the greatest basketball player of all time to a small church court in Chicago, searching for the friend and mentor he'd spent decades trying to find. This is the story of Marques Johnson, the man who helped shape Jordan's legendary career, then disappeared into the shadows of his own tragedy. And it all began on an ordinary morning outside a coffee shop, with a homeless man's tales that nobody believed. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the tall buildings of downtown Chicago when Marques settled into his usual spot outside the Daily Grind coffee shop. His weathered hands clutched a thin cardboard sign that read, "Any help appreciated. God bless." But unlike other homeless people in the area, Marques wasn't just asking for money. He was telling stories. "You see, young man," Marques called out to a boy walking past with his father, "I once played basketball with the greatest player of all time." His deep voice carried the warmth of summer asphalt on a basketball court, smooth and familiar. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, he's talking about Michael Jordan." "Keep walking, Tommy," the father muttered, pulling his son along. "He's just making up stories." Marques didn't seem bothered by their reaction. He just smiled and adjusted the worn Chicago Bulls cap on his head, the red so faded it was almost pink. His belongings sat neatly beside him, a backpack that had seen better days, a thin blanket, and an old water bottle. The morning crowd rushed past, clutching their coffee cups like shields against the world. Most people pretended not to see him, but Marques kept talking anyway, his stories floating on the wind like fallen leaves. "Did you know Jordan used to practice his free throws before sunrise?" He called out to no one in particular. Said the morning quiet helped him focus. "I'd rebound for him sometimes, back in '84. Sarah Chen first noticed Marques on her way to the coffee shop with her mom. At 12 years old, she was old enough to know that most people ignored the homeless, but young enough to still question why. She watched as business people in suits walked past, some dropping coins in his cup without looking, others quickening their pace. "Mom," Sarah whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Why is that man talking about Michael Jordan?" Lisa Chen glanced at Marques, then back at her daughter. "Some people make up stories to get attention, honey. Come on, we'll be late for your piano lesson." But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the man in the Bulls cap. Unlike the other homeless people she'd seen, he didn't just ask for money. He told stories with such detail, such life in his voice, that they seemed to paint pictures in the air. The next morning, Sarah convinced her mom to stop at the Daily Grind again. Marques was there, as always, but this time he was talking to a teenage boy wearing a Bulls jersey. Man, you should have seen his hands," Marques was saying, spreading his own fingers wide. Jordan's hands were so big, he could palm a basketball like it was an orange. But it wasn't just the size, it was how he used them. The control he had? That was something special. The teenager leaned against the wall, actually listening. But everyone knows Jordan had big hands. That's like common knowledge. Marques chuckled, a sound like gravel under tires. "Sure, everyone knows that now. But I'm talking about before. Before the championships. Before the fame. Back when he was just Michael, a rookie trying to prove himself. Did you know he used to dribble with weighted gloves? Said it made the ball feel lighter during games." Sarah's eyes widened. She'd never heard that before, and she'd watched every Jordan documentary with her dad. who was a huge basketball fan. "Here's your coffee, Mom," the barista called out, and Lisa turned to grab their order. "Can we stay a little longer?" Sarah asked, her eyes still on Marcus. "Please." Lisa checked her phone. 5 minutes, but then we really have to go." Sarah inched closer to Marcus, clutching her hot chocolate. The teenager had walked away, but Marcus was still talking, his voice carrying stories into the cool morning air. "The thing about Jordan that most people don't know," he was saying, "was how he treated the ball boys and the cleaning staff. Always knew their names. Always said, 'Thank you.' That's how you judge a person's character, by how they treat people. Who can't do anything for them?" "Is that really true?" Sarah found herself asking before she could stop herself. Marcus turned to her, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Despite his ragged clothes and unshaven face, there was something gentle about him. Something that made Sarah think of her grandfather who passed away last year. "Every word," he said. "I remember this one time, after practice." He paused, reaching for his water bottle with hands that trembled slightly. "Would you like to hear about it?" Sarah nodded eagerly, but her mother's hand fell on her shoulder. "We need to go, Sarah. Piano, remember?" "But Mom..." "Maybe another time," Marcus said kindly. "The stories aren't going anywhere. Neither am I." He smiled, but Sarah thought she saw something sad in his eyes. As they walked away, Sarah kept looking back. Marcus had started talking again, his stories following them down the street like echoes. "Mom," Sarah said finally, "why doesn't anybody believe him?" Lisa sighed, juggling her coffee and her phone. "Think about it, honey. Why would someone who really knew Michael Jordan be homeless?" "Maybe there's a reason," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe there's more to his story." "Maybe," her mom said distractedly, checking her email. "But sometimes people just make up stories to make themselves feel better about their situation. It's sad, but that's how it is." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about Marcus. The way he told his stories. It wasn't like he was trying to convince anyone. It was like he was remembering, like he was seeing it all play out again behind his eyes. She thought about the details he mentioned, the weighted gloves, the early morning practices, the way Jordan treated the staff. Those weren't the kind of things you read in books or saw in documentaries. Those were the kind of details that came from being there. As they rounded the corner, Sarah heard Marcus's voice one last time, carried on the wind. Basketball isn't just about talent. Jordan understood that better than anyone. It's about heart, about seeing the potential in every moment. Sarah clutched her hot chocolate tighter, already planning how she could convince her mom to stop at the daily grind again tomorrow. Because somewhere between Marcus's gentle voice and his incredible stories, she'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. And if he was, she wanted to know why a man who once played basketball with Michael Jordan was now sitting on a street corner, sharing his memories with strangers who didn't believe him. She had a feeling there was much more to Marcus's story than anyone knew, and somehow she was going to find out what it was. Sarah couldn't focus during her piano lesson. Her fingers stumbled over the keys as she kept thinking about Marcus and his stories. Mrs. Rodriguez, her piano teacher, had to remind her 3 times to pay attention to the sheet music. "Sarah, honey, is everything okay?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her forehead wrinkled with concern. "You're usually much more focused than this." "Sorry," Sarah mumbled. "I just can't stop thinking about something." That something turned into a plan by the time she got home. Sarah knew her mom stopped at the daily grind every morning before dropping her off at school. If she could just wake up a little earlier, maybe she could spend more time listening to Marcus's stories. That evening, while her mom made dinner, Sarah grabbed her dad's old basketball magazines from the garage. She spread them across her bedroom floor, flipping through pages yellowed with age. There were dozens of articles about Michael Jordan, but none mentioned anything about the weighted gloves Marcus had talked about. "Interesting reading material," her dad said, appearing in her doorway. I thought you were more into soccer than basketball. Sarah looked up from a 1985 magazine. Dad, do you remember everything about when Jordan first started playing? He chuckled, sitting down on her bed. I was pretty young then, but I remember watching his rookie year. Why the sudden interest? Sarah told him about Marcus and his stories. Her dad listened carefully, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. You know, sweetie, he said gently, there were hundreds of people who claimed to know Jordan back then. Everyone wanted to be connected to his success. But Dad, Marcus is different. He knows things that aren't in these magazines. Her father picked up one of the magazines, nostalgia crossing his face. Just be careful, okay? Not everyone tells the truth, even if their stories sound real. The next morning, Sarah set her alarm 30 minutes earlier than usual. She dug through her piggy bank and pulled out $10 she'd saved from her allowance. Mom, she called out as soon as she got downstairs. Can we please stop at the Daily Grind today? I'll pay for your coffee. Lisa Chen raised an eyebrow at her daughter's unusual enthusiasm for early morning coffee runs, but agreed. When they arrived, Marcus was already in his usual spot, talking to a small group of high school students. And that's when Jordan said, "It's not just about jumping high, it's about knowing when to jump," Marcus was saying. Changed the way I thought about the game completely. Sarah approached while her mom went inside for coffee. She pulled out her phone and, trying to be subtle, hit the record button. She wanted to capture every detail. "Hi, Marcus," she said shyly. "I brought you something." She held out a paper bag containing a blueberry muffin she'd convinced her mom to buy. Marcus's face lit up with genuine surprise. "Well, if it isn't my young friend from yesterday. Thank you. That's very kind." He took the bag carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Could you tell me more about when you played with Jordan?" Sarah asked, sitting down on the sidewalk next to him, keeping her phone partially hidden in her lap. Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. "You're different from most people who pass by," he said. "Most don't stop to listen. They just hear Jordan and think I'm crazy." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am, a little bit, but not about this." For the next 15 minutes, Marcus told Sarah about practice sessions in an empty gym, the squeak of sneakers on hardwood floors, and the way Jordan would study game tapes for hours, looking for the smallest advantages. He had this move, Marcus said, his eyes distant with memory, where he'd fake right, then spin left, but the real trick was in his shoulders. They'd tell a different story than his feet. Used to drive defenders crazy trying to figure out which to watch. Sarah's phone recorded it all, catching every detail, every inflection in Marcus's voice. The way he described things was so specific, so vivid. "Sarah, we need to go," her mom called from the coffee shop door. "Just a minute," Sarah called back. She turned to Marcus. "How come you never told anyone else about all this? Like the newspapers or TV stations?" Something flickered across Marcus's face. Pain, maybe, or fear. "Some stories," he said quietly, "are better left in the past." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, her mom was beside them. "Sarah, we're going to be late. And please don't sit on the sidewalk in your school clothes." As Sarah stood up, Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled something out. "Here," he said, holding out a creased piece of paper. "Since you're one of the few who actually listens." Sarah took it carefully. It was an old photograph, the edges worn smooth with age. Her eyes widened as she made out what it showed, but before she could say anything, her mom was pulling her away. "Thanks, Marcus," she called over her shoulder. "I'll be back tomorrow." In the car, Sarah stared at the photograph. It showed a college basketball team from 1984, their uniforms looking strange and old-fashioned. And there, in the back row, was a face she recognized. Younger, cleaner shaven, but unmistakably Marcus. But that wasn't what made her heart race. It was who was standing next to him in the photo, both of them grinning at the camera with their arms around each other's shoulders. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her fingers trembling. I think Marcus is telling the truth, because there in the photograph, looking impossibly young but instantly recognizable, was Michael Jordan himself. Sarah's phone felt heavy in her pocket, filled with recorded stories that suddenly carried much more weight. She had proof now, or at least the beginning of proof. But something still didn't add up. If Marcus really had played with Jordan, what had happened to make him end up here, on this street corner? And why did he look so scared when she asked about telling his story to others? Sarah clutched the photograph tighter. She was more determined than ever to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Because now she knew for certain, Marcus wasn't just telling stories. He was hiding one. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept taking the photograph out from under her pillow, using her phone's flashlight to study every detail. The team name on their jerseys read North Carolina, and she recognized the famous basketball court from TV games. But it was the date scribbled on the back that really caught her attention. March 1984. Sarah opened her laptop and started searching. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she looked up North Carolina's basketball team from 1984. There were plenty of articles about Michael Jordan. Everyone knew he'd played there before becoming an NBA star. But finding information about his teammates was harder. She was so focused on her research that she almost didn't hear her mom knock on her door. Sarah? It's almost midnight, sweetie. You should be asleep. Sarah quickly shut her laptop. Just finishing some homework, Mom. But sleep wasn't going to come easily. The more she learned, the more questions she had. Why wasn't Marcus's name mentioned in any of the articles she could find? And if he really played college basketball with Jordan, what happened after that? The next morning, Sarah convinced her mom to stop at the Daily Grind extra early. But when they got there, Marcus wasn't in his usual spot. Maybe he's just late, Sarah said, trying to hide her disappointment. She bought 2 coffees with her allowance money, one for her mom and one for Marcus, just in case. They waited 15 minutes, but Marcus didn't show up. Sarah left the coffee cup in his spot, hoping he'd find it when he arrived. At school, she could barely focus on her classes. During lunch break, she pulled out her phone and played back the recordings of Marcus's stories. Something he'd said yesterday caught her attention. Jordan always said timing was everything. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. Not just in basketball, but in life. One wrong move, one bad decision, and everything can change. The way his voice had dropped when he said that last part, it was like he wasn't just talking about basketball anymore. After school, Sarah begged her mom to drive by the Daily Grind again. This time, Marcus was there, but he looked different. Tired, worried. The coffee cup she'd left was empty beside him. "Thanks for the coffee," he said when he saw her. Nobody's ever done that before. Sarah sat down beside him, ignoring her mom's disapproving look from the car. "I found something interesting about this photo," she said, pulling it out carefully. "You played for North Carolina?" Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he took the photo. "That was a lifetime ago. Were you good?" A small smile crossed his face. "Good enough to get drafted?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You played in the NBA?" "Almost." The smile faded. "Sometimes life has other plans." "What happened?" Marcus handed the photo back, his eyes distant. "Had a bad fall during practice, injured my knee, that's all." But something in his voice made Sarah think there was more to the story. She pulled out her phone and opened a website she'd found during lunch. But according to this old newspaper article, Marcus Johnson was drafted by the Chicago Bulls in 1984. "That's you, isn't it?" Marcus's face went pale. He looked around quickly, as if checking to see who might be listening. "Where did you find that?" "In the newspaper archives at the library website. You were picked in the 2nd round. But then, there's nothing else about you. It's like you just disappeared." "Sarah!" her mom called from the car. 5 minutes. Marcus was staring at the ground now, his hands clasped tightly together. "Some things are better left in the past," he said quietly. Some stories shouldn't be dug up. But why? You were going to play in the NBA? With Michael Jordan? What really happened? Marcus looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's questions die in her throat. It wasn't anger. It was fear. "Listen to me, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're a good kid, kind, smart. But trust me when I say this, stop digging, please." "But, Sarah, time to go." Sarah stood up slowly, confused and a little scared by Marcus's reaction. As she turned to leave, she noticed something fall from his backpack, a folded newspaper clipping. She picked it up quickly. "You dropped this," she started to say, but the words caught in her throat as she glimpsed the headline. "Tragic accident claims family of Bulls rookie." Before she could read more, Marcus snatched the clipping from her hand, stuffing it deep into his pocket. His hands were shaking badly now. "Go home, Sarah," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Some mysteries should stay mysteries." In the car, Sarah's mind was racing. She'd thought finding out Marcus was telling the truth about knowing Jordan would be the end of the mystery. But now she realized it was just the beginning. She pulled out her phone and typed Marcus Johnson Bulls 1984 accident into the search bar. But before she could see the results, her mom glanced over. "Sarah, honey? Are you okay? You look pale." Sarah quickly closed the browser. "I'm fine," she said. But she wasn't fine, because she'd seen the date on that newspaper clipping. October 1984. The same month Marcus Johnson disappeared from basketball forever. What had happened that made a promising NBA rookie end up homeless on the streets of Chicago? And why was Marcus so scared of anyone finding out the truth? Sarah had a feeling the real story was bigger and darker than she'd imagined. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus was right. Maybe some mysteries were better left unsolved. But as she thought about the fear in Marcus's eyes and the trembling of his hands, she knew she couldn't stop now. Someone had to know the truth. Someone had to remember what happened to Marcus Johnson, even if that truth was something Marcus himself was trying to forget. That evening, Sarah could barely touch her dinner. The mystery of Marcus Johnson swirled in her head like a basketball spinning on a fingertip, refusing to settle. "Sarah, you've hardly eaten anything," her mom said, looking concerned. "What's wrong?" Sarah pushed her peas around her plate. "Mom, can I ask you something? You're good at finding information about people, right? Because of your job?" Lisa Chen set down her fork. As a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, she'd spent years tracking down stories and sources. "What's this about?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's about Marcus. I found out his real name is Marcus Johnson. He was drafted by the Bulls in 1984, and then something terrible happened to his family." Her mom's expression changed. "Sarah, what exactly have you been doing?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed her mom the recordings, the photo, and her research. As Lisa listened, her reporter's instincts clearly kicked in. She started taking notes. "And then I saw this newspaper clipping about an accident," Sarah finished. "But he wouldn't let me read it." Lisa was already opening her laptop. "Let me see what I can find in the Tribune's archives." Sarah watched as her mom's fingers flew across the keyboard. After a few minutes, Lisa's face grew serious. "Oh my," she whispered. "Sarah, this is quite a story." "What did you find?" Her mom turned the screen so Sarah could see. There were several articles from 1984, all about Marcus Johnson. The first ones were exciting, about his college career, being drafted by the Bulls, his promising future playing alongside rookie sensation Michael Jordan. But then came the October headlines: Bulls rookie's wife and daughter lost in tragic accident. Marcus Johnson leaves team to grieve. Mystery surrounds Bulls player's disappearance. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "what happened to them?" Lisa scrolled through the articles. According to this, Marcus's wife and 5-year-old daughter were driving to his first preseason game. There was a terrible storm that night. She paused, glancing at Sarah. Maybe we shouldn't. Please, Mom. I need to know. Lisa nodded slowly. Their car went off the road. They didn't make it. Marcus played in the game, not knowing what had happened. When he found out afterward, he just disappeared. The team couldn't find him. His teammates couldn't reach him. He just vanished. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. And nobody looked for him? They did, honey. Jordan himself made public appeals for Marcus to come back. But sometimes, when people are hurting that badly, they don't want to be found. Sarah thought about Marcus, sitting outside the Daily Grind, telling stories about basketball and Jordan to anyone who would listen. Had he been trying to hold on to the happier times before that terrible night? There's more, her mom said, clicking another link. Before the accident, Marcus was known for mentoring younger players. Jordan mentioned him several times in interviews. That fall, saying Marcus had helped him adjust to professional basketball. Really? Yes. Listen to this quote from Jordan. Marcus Johnson taught me more about the mental side of basketball in 2 months than I learned in my entire college career. He sees things others don't see. Sarah remembered Marcus's words about timing and how one decision could change everything. Now she understood what he meant. Mom, Sarah said suddenly, you know people at the Bulls organization, right? From your reporting? Lisa nodded slowly. A few. Why? Could you maybe call them? See if they know about Marcus? Her mom was quiet for a moment, thinking, it was a long time ago, Sarah. Most of the people from back then aren't with the team anymore. But maybe somebody remembers something. Please, Mom. Marcus needs help. Lisa looked at her daughter's pleading face and sighed. I'll make some calls tomorrow. But Sarah, be careful with Marcus. Sometimes when people have been through trauma like that, they can be unpredictable. He's not dangerous, Mom. He's just sad. Still, promise me you won't go see him alone anymore. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. There had to be a way to help Marcus. Maybe if people knew who he really was, knew what he'd been through. The next morning, Sarah convinced her mom to stop at the Daily Grind again. But Marcus wasn't there. Or the next day. Or the day after that. Maybe he moved to another spot, her mom suggested on the 4th day. But Sarah knew better. Marcus had realized she was getting too close to his story, and he'd disappeared, just like he had 40 years ago. She was sitting on her bed that evening, feeling defeated, when her mom burst into her room, phone in hand. Sarah, you won't believe who just called me back. Who? Lisa's eyes were shining with excitement. An old friend who works in the Bulls front office. When I mentioned Marcus Johnson, he got really quiet. Then he asked me to hold on. Sarah, she paused dramatically. He's calling Michael Jordan right now. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. What? Why? Because apparently, Jordan never stopped looking for Marcus. All these years, he's had people trying to find him. He thought Marcus was somewhere out west, maybe California. He never imagined that Marcus was right here in Chicago. Sarah finished, telling stories about him outside a coffee shop. Lisa nodded. They want to know everything we know, every detail. They want to help him, Sarah. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time they were happy tears. Maybe this was why she'd been meant to hear Marcus's stories. Maybe she could help write a new ending to his story. But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't help worrying. What if Marcus didn't want to be found? What if he ran away again? And most importantly, what would happen when Michael Jordan himself learned that his long-lost friend and mentor had been living on the streets of Chicago, keeping their shared past alive through stories that nobody believed? Sarah had a feeling she was about to find out. She just hoped Marcus would forgive her for uncovering the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. For the next 3 days, Sarah jumped every time her mom's phone rang. But there was no news about Marcus or Michael Jordan. Marcus's usual spot outside. The Daily Grind remained empty. and Sarah's heart sank a little more each morning when they drove past. Maybe he's gone for good, she whispered to herself on the fourth morning, staring at the empty sidewalk. But then she spotted something. There, tucked against the wall of the coffee shop, was Marcus's old Bulls cap. Sarah jumped out of the car, before her mom could stop her. "Sarah, wait!" her mom called, hurrying after her. Sarah picked up the cap carefully. Under it was a folded piece of paper with her name on it. Her hand shook as she opened it. "Dear Sarah," the note read in shaky handwriting, "you remind me of my daughter. She was curious too, always asking questions, always wanting to know the whole story. I'm sorry I ran away. Old habits, I guess. But you deserve to know the truth. Meet me at the old court behind St. Mary's Church at 4 p.m. today. Bring your mom." "Marcus! Mom!" Sarah called out, waving the note. "Look!" Lisa read the note, her reporter's instincts clearly on alert. "I don't know, Sarah. This seems risky. Please, Mom. He's asking for both of us. He wants to tell the truth." After a long moment, Lisa nodded. "I'll call the Bulls office first. They should know." The rest of the school day crawled by like a snail racing through peanut butter. Sarah couldn't focus on anything her teachers said. All she could think about was Marcus and his story. At 3:45, Sarah and her mom pulled up to St. Mary's Church. The basketball court behind it was old but well kept, with chain nets that jingled in the breeze. Marcus was already there, sitting on a wooden bench. He looked different, cleaner, wearing fresh clothes, his gray hair neatly combed. But his eyes were red, like he hadn't slept. "You came," he said softly as they approached. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course we came," Sarah said, sitting beside him. "We've been worried about you." Marcus smiled sadly. "Been a long time since anyone worried about me." He took a deep breath. "I owe you an explanation. Both of you." He pulled out an old leather wallet, carefully removing a worn photograph. It showed a beautiful woman, holding a little girl with pigtails, both laughing at the camera. "This is Maria and Jenny," he said, his voice cracking. "My wife and daughter. They were my whole world." Sarah noticed her mom taking out her phone, pressing record. "That night," Marcus continued, "I was so excited about my first preseason game. Maria promised they'd be there to watch. There was a storm. The roads were bad. But I didn't tell them not to come. I was selfish. I wanted them there." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I played that whole game not knowing they were already gone. Scored 12 points. Jordan even gave me a high five. Then, in the locker room after, the police were waiting." Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Her mom reached out and squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "I couldn't handle it," Marcus said. "Couldn't face anyone. So I ran, changed my name, lived on the streets where nobody would look for me. The only thing I kept was the memories of basketball, of playing with Jordan. Those were the last happy memories I had." "But Jordan looked for you," Sarah said. "He never stopped." Marcus nodded. "I know. I saw the interviews sometimes on TV through store windows, but I didn't deserve to be found. It was my fault they were on that road that night?" "No," Lisa said firmly. "It was an accident, Marcus. A terrible accident. No one blamed you. I blamed me." He stood up, walking to the free throw line. "You know what's funny? I can still feel it. The rhythm, the release point. Some things you never forget." He picked up a basketball that was lying nearby and shot it. The ball arced perfectly through the chain net with a soft swish. "Jordan used to say I had the prettiest jump shot he'd ever seen," Marcus said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Said I should be teaching shooting clinics instead of playing backup guard." Sarah noticed her mom texting someone, but she was too focused on Marcus to ask who. "Why did you leave the note today?" Sarah asked. "Why now?" Marcus retrieved the ball, holding it like something precious. "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten. That it's okay to let people care. That maybe my story isn't just about loss. Maybe it's about the game, too." and friendship and second chances. He turned to Sarah's mom. "You called the Bulls, didn't you? After Sarah found out who I was?" Lisa nodded. "They've been looking for you, Marcus. Jordan's been looking for you." "I know," he said quietly. "And maybe it's time to stop running." Just then, they heard a car pull up in the church parking lot. Marcus froze, the basketball slipping from his hands. Sarah turned to look, and her heart nearly stopped. Because stepping out of a black SUV was a tall, familiar figure that even a 12-year-old basketball fan would recognize instantly. Michael Jordan had found his long-lost friend at last. Marcus took a step backward, looking like he might run again. But Sarah quickly grabbed his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Marcus squeezed her hand, and together they waited as the greatest basketball player of all time walked toward them, his eyes fixed on the friend he'd spent 40 years trying to find. Michael Jordan walked across the court with the same grace he'd shown during his playing days, though his hair was now gray and his famous earring was gone. His eyes never left Marcus's face as he approached. Sarah felt Marcus's hand trembling in hers. She squeezed it tighter, trying to give him courage. Jordan stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle clicking of the chain nets in the breeze. 40 years, Jordan said finally, his deep voice thick with emotion. 40 years I've been looking for you, Marcus. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Michael." "Sorry?" Jordan shook his head. "You don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself one." Then, before Marcus could respond, Jordan closed the distance between them and pulled his old friend into a tight hug. Marcus stiffened at first, then slowly melted into the embrace, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Sarah felt her mom's hand on her shoulder, gently pulling her back to give the two men some space, but they could still hear the conversation. "I should have been there for you," Jordan was saying. "Should have known something was wrong when you missed practice that next day." Marcus pulled back, wiping his eyes. "There was nothing anyone could do. I couldn't face it. Couldn't face you. Not after losing Maria and Jenny," Jordan finished softly. "I knew them too, remember? Maria used to bring Jenny to practice sometimes. That little girl had the best laugh I'd ever heard." Fresh tears rolled down Marcus's cheeks. "She loved watching us play. Said she was going to be the first woman in the NBA." Jordan smiled sadly. "She had your jump shot already. Remember that day she made 3 baskets in a row from the free throw line?" "With you rebounding for her," Marcus said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You told her she had better form than half the team." "Because she did." Jordan picked up the basketball that had rolled nearby. "You taught her well, just like you taught me." Sarah's eyes widened. She knew from her research that Marcus had mentored Jordan, but hearing it directly from the greatest player ever made it feel more real. "Those 2 months you were with the team," Jordan continued, spinning the ball in his hands, "you changed my whole approach to the game. All that stuff about reading defenders' shoulders, about using their momentum against them, that became the foundation of my playing style." "You would have figured it out anyway," Marcus said quietly. "You were always special." "Maybe, but you saw it first. You believed in me before anyone else did." Jordan gestured around the court. "And now I find out you've been right here in Chicago, sleeping on streets, telling stories about our time together that nobody believed." "The stories kept me going," Marcus admitted. "Kept them alive somehow. Maria and Jenny loved basketball so much. It felt like as long as I talked about the game, they weren't really gone." Jordan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, that ends today. No more streets, no more running." Marcus looked uncertain. "Michael, I can't." "Yes, you can," Jordan interrupted. "I've got a position waiting for you with the Bulls youth program. teaching kids the game just like you taught me. The paperwork's already done." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm just a homeless man who has 40 years of basketball knowledge to share," Jordan finished. "Who sees things others don't see. Who helped shape my career in just 2 months." He held out the basketball. "Show me that jump shot. Bet it's still pretty." Marcus hesitated, then took the ball. He dribbled twice, muscle memory from thousands of practice hours taking over. The shot was perfect. Nothing but net. "Still got it?" Jordan grinned. Then his face grew serious. "Marcus, you can't change what happened that night, but you can honor their memory by sharing your gift. Those kids at the youth center, they need someone who understands both the game and loss. Someone who can teach them that basketball isn't just about winning, it's about healing, too." Sarah couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Please say yes, Marcus," she called out. "Your stories helped me understand basketball better than any book or video. Think how many other kids you could help." Marcus looked at her, then at Jordan, then back at the basket. "You really think I could?" "I know you could," Jordan said firmly. "And I'll be there to help. We've got 40 years to make up for." Slowly, Marcus nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Jordan grinned, then took off his jacket and grabbed the ball. "How about we show this young lady what old school basketball looks like? I've got a few moves I still need to thank you for teaching me." For the next hour, Sarah sat with her mom on the bench, watching in amazement as Michael Jordan and Marcus Johnson played one-on-one on that old court behind St. Mary's Church. Their moves were slower than in their prime, but the magic was still there. In Marcus's perfect jump shot, in Jordan's famous fadeaway, and most of all, in the smiles on both their faces. 3 months later, Sarah sat in the stands of the Bulls Sattis practice facility, watching Marcus coach a group of young players. He looked different now, healthy, well-dressed, his eyes bright with purpose. Jordan stopped by regularly to help, but everyone knew Marcus was the real teacher. "Remember," she heard him telling a young girl who was practicing her jump shot, "basketball isn't just about talent. It's about heart, about seeing the potential in every moment." The girl nodded seriously, then took her shot. Perfect form, perfect follow-through, nothing but net. Marcus high-fived her, his smile bright enough to light up the whole gym. And there, watching from the doorway, was Michael Jordan, nodding in approval at his old friend and mentor. Sarah pulled out her phone and started recording. She had learned that some stories were too important not to share, too precious to be lost. And Marcus's story wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about friendship, redemption, and the healing power of the game he loved. Now, when people passed the daily grind and noticed Marcus's empty spot, they didn't just hurry by. They stopped and told their own stories about the homeless man who used to talk about playing with Michael Jordan. But these days, they ended their stories differently. You know what? He was telling the truth all along. And now he's back where he belongs, in a gym, teaching kids the game, sharing his gift, just like he did with Jordan all those years ago. Because sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be true. Sometimes lost friends find their way back to each other. And sometimes a simple game of basketball can heal even the deepest wounds, especially when played with an open heart and a pretty jump shot. Thanks for joining me for this incredible story of friendship, redemption, and the healing power of basketball. Marcus and Jordan's journey reminds us that sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be true, and it's never too late for a second chance. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. For another amazing story of sports legends and second chances, click the video appearing on your screen right now. Until next time, keep believing in the power of friendship and never judge a book by its cover. Stay blessed.